Well, hi everybody, and thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here, and looking forward to speaking more, as Jordan was saying, around what's required to deliver flexibility on a day-to-day basis. And I thought before we get to some of the conversation on that, I would give a quick overview to the folks on the webinar, a little bit of a snapshot of what Pulse is and what we've been up to over the few years. So we were founded approximately 4 years ago. We, over the period of time since then, have brought 8 operational BESS facilities into being 200 megawatts in total. We've got one more 50 megawatt under construction now, due to energize imminently. And we've got funding secured and are breaking ground on an additional 300 megawatts. The average duration of these systems is 2 hours. So by the time we're done this build out, which should take us to about Q3, Q4 of 2027, we'll have approximately 1.2 gigawatt hours installed in the UK. And you can see the map on the left-hand side there showing the locational facilities. We are backed by an institutional investor, Canadian Pension Fund Investment Management Corporation of Ontario. They have made a seed investment of 300 million pounds, or half a billion Canadian. And another relevant note, because of some of the projects that we've built, we won Energy Storage Deal of the Year in 2023 from IJ Global. The other piece that I think is important before we get going is to talk about the values that define our work at Pulse. And so, I think the team is the most important part, and this will come out in some of the next pieces of conversation in our discussion. The team is the most important piece that's required for delivery of flexibility and projects into the system. And the values that define us are leadership, ethical stewardship, and teamwork. By leadership, what we mean is fostering curiosity, challenging the status quo, pushing boundaries, and quite importantly, doing what is right, not necessarily what is easy. That certainly comes to bear in things like supply chains, which are complicated to navigate, and you have to make some difficult choices, and sometimes pay more for an outcome that delivers against the values that you want to uphold. The other piece, ethical stewardship, and we worked in partnership with the National Wealth Fund and LCP Delta to release a tool, an open source tool that allows anybody that owns and operates BESS assets to calculate what their life cycle emissions avoidance are from operating that facility, which includes the carbon that it takes to actually manufacture and construct the facility, and then the payback period around how BESS operations enables lower emissions on the grid. The last piece I'll mention, teamwork. I've said the team is the most important part about execution and delivery. Ultimately, it's at the core of our success, and a shared understanding that we're more capable of working together than we are individually is what guides that. And that doesn't include just inside our fence. That's with all of our partners as well, because obviously it's critically important for us to work with our partners in a collaborative way in order to be able to deliver the great projects that we do. And I think one of the key elements involved in that is, wherever possible, minimizing ego. I think that really is what guides finding element about how we want to operate, and what we think is crucial to delivering at pace and at scale. The other thing that I think is worth touching on is why investing in flexibility matters. I mean, we're going to get to some of the more practical and tactical components of delivery in a couple of slides, but I think it's worth taking a moment to step back and have a bit of a dialogue around, why are we doing this in the first place? Why does it matter, and what does it yield and deliver to society by investing in flexibility, and how does it support the energy system? So if we back up for a moment and look at the context of the global energy system and how much we spend on energy as a society, what this graph is showing is effectively what I'll define as society's modern relationship with energy. Now, this is primary energy as a percent of global GDP. And so what it is it's a measure of how much of our economic, how much of our economic output we spend on energy in order to keep everything running in our modern civilization. So if we go back to around 1900, which is really when energy got going at a global scale, you can see that from 1900 until 1970, we didn't spend more than about 3% of global GDP on the energy system. And that was primarily coal, oil, and gas hadn't really, come into feature as much. You'll see that pick up obviously as we move into the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But 3% of global GDP, and then we hit an oil shock in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And hopefully things don't follow similar trajectories, but certainly the geopolitical environment that we're in right now, begs the question of where are we headed in 2026, 2027, 2028. You can see that obviously that shock then took the percentage that we spent of global GDP from 2.5%, 3% a year for the last 7 decades up into that 8, 9, peaking 12, 13% of global GDP. Um, we then fell back as that crisis ameliorated and landed ourselves in the 4-ish% range in the 90s and 2000. Again, a period of great economic progress where a lot of technological innovation occurred. We had the advent and popularization of things like the internet around that period of time. And then energy prices took off again, taking us back to that 8, 9, 10% of global GDP level. Again, coming around the late 20 teens into the early 2020s. But you'll notice a trend is that every time we rise, when it comes back down, it never quite reaches that bottom baseline that we became accustomed to in the period of massive expansion between 1900 and 1970. And then as we look at where we are today, the latest rises and the energy crisis of 21 and 22 took us to, again, back up to 12, 13, nearing 14% of global GDP. Obviously, 2026 isn't over yet, but it'll be interesting to see where we end up in 2026 as a percentage of global GDP. The one of the key takeaways that I really wanted to reference here is if you step back and think about how much global GDP is now, 110, 115 trillion US dollars, let's say 100 for round numbers, in excess of $15 trillion a year as a global society on energy. And I think one of the key elements that is available to us by reducing costs, increasing security, and increasing stability of the energy system is that we will actually be able to bring a lot of that cost down and use that percentage of global GDP to do other things. And so, if you think about how that equation looks, lowering total system cost by investing in lower cost forms of energy and the technology to manage them, plus creates higher energy security. And so those two things work together to create additional societal capital and abundant energy access, which allows us to spend more on healthcare, on education, on public infrastructure, things like waters and water treatment, roads, transport, all sorts of public facilities. And ultimately what that does is it leads to a rising standard of living, which is, in my view, exactly the pursuit that we're after. That is what we're trying to do with the investments that we're currently making in the energy system. We're working to lower total system costs, to improve energy security, to create additional societal capital, which then can be invested in the things that create a rising standard of living. And that we have been doing for the last 125 years. And I think there's amazing precedent for what we're able to achieve. That's why flexibility is so important, because what it does is it enables that lower total system cost and that higher energy security. It is an energy management facet that's absolutely required, particularly as renewable penetration increases and delivers low cost energy to the system. So now that we've covered the value component and the why we're doing this, I'll turn to part of the the core of the presentation, which is execution. Execution in our view at Pulse and in my view is absolutely paramount. And the reason for that is it allows you to turn project ambition into operating assets. And really, that is what we're all about as a business and what this industry is striving to do over the course of the next 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. What is the it's complex. Delivering projects means managing a number of orbits. You have everything from technical design and grid connection to siting and optimization, procurement and operations, and regulatory and capital access. And you can think of all of those things as planets that are sort of orbiting a central convener. And that is really what being a flexibility business is about, is managing all of those pieces, building the team that has the expertise and the inbuilt knowledge to weave all of those components together, which allows you to deliver those projects at pace and at scale. Now, the imperative, why execution matters now. Execution has always mattered, but it matters now more than ever because in the current period of time that we're in, we still have a tremendous amount of legacy energy assets that we've invested, quite a bit in over the past number of years. And we're now investing in a modern energy system. And in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to convert pipeline into assets. We need to meet system needs, enable energy security, and generate cash flow for investors. And what that means is taking the gigawatts and gigawatts of pipeline and actually executing on and turning them into operational assets that not only work well but also generate returns. That is those are the three components that govern the need. The system obviously needs it. We certainly need a higher degree of energy security and energy sovereignty, and investor returns are required in order to marshal the capital and the equity and the debt that's required to come into this. And a couple of stats that I think are worth noting is that you can nearly 53% of generation in 2025. That's massive. That's up from I think it was 3% in 2020. So in a couple of decades, we've gone from almost nothing from a contribution perspective to over half of the generation that comes into the electricity system in the UK. That's a tremendous amount of work, but there's still more to come. And without storage and flexibility, that's why storage and flexibility are so important. With the penetration rates reaching such high levels, curtailment will naturally rise, and the value of that dispatched energy will erode. The system needs to ensure that we can deliver dispatchable energy to make sure that that energy gets to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And that feeds quite nicely into the component of energy security because all of this is locally sourced. Conflict around the world continues to highlight fuel vulnerability, but that's only one of the elements that actually lead to higher energy system costs. There's everything from unplanned outages to weather events to supply chain disruptions that can lead to similar types of outcomes where the energy system is vulnerable and we can see costs rise. Domestically deployed batteries and renewables are sovereign assets. And I think it's important to mention that those certainly need to work in context with the existing system. And it's that we see gas completely phased out over the near term. I think even CP30 contemplates a portion of gas remaining on the system for the foreseeable future. But domestically deployed batteries and renewables can massively decrease not only total system costs, but the energy security risks that we may face in the future. And then last but not least, obviously, in order to make this equation go round, investor returns have to be addressed. Modern hit a record 2.3 trillion of investment in 2025. Battery storage M&A surged 60% year over year. And I think really what that is illustrating is that the capital allocators, the institutional investors, and the large debt providers and senior lenders are looking at this as a necessity. The capital is available, and I think that record 2.3 trillion investment underscores that. But that capital follows an execution track record and not pipeline promises, which is why execution is so important. To get capital at scale and to be able to deploy capital at scale, it's going to be increasingly important to demonstrate to investors that you've got that execution track record and that you've got the team that can deliver against those promises. The other point that I wanted to make was, this does not depend on future breakthroughs. We have all of the technology we need. This isn't a bet on future breakthroughs. Batteries, solar, onshore, offshore wind are all mature and proven technologies, and alongside gas can deploy energy at scale globally. We saw 100 gigawatts of global battery storage installed in 2025, which is a 43% increase over 2024. All indications are that that trend will continue to be followed with increasing installs in 2026 and beyond. And I think, very importantly, the cost of 4-hour battery storage is coming down because of the fact that CapEx has been falling. This makes dispatchable solar and BESS something that can be delivered at under $80 a megawatt hour, which, certainly in the current fuel environment is incredibly competitive, and is a level that is both sustainable um, and productive for society. That would bring those total costs that we talked about in that chart, which showed the percentage of global GDP that we spend energy on, significantly from where we sit today. As an example, energy right now is trading in the UK, at the margin somewhere between, 100, 100 and 125. A few days ago, it was trading up around 200. So at 65, you're at worst, half of where we are, and potentially a third of the cost that we're seeing right now in the electrical system, when gas is running at the margin. I mentioned earlier that from renewables has grown massively over the last 2 decades, up to 53% in 2025, up from just 3% in 2000. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of work, and I think a success story that the country and a lot of the folks that have been working on doing this can be proud of. And supporting that is a large fall in the CapEx. We've seen battery energy storage system costs fall by about half 2023 to 2025 as the production of that equipment has scaled up. That cost is a significant driver of why you see the stat on the left-hand side about the 100 gigawatts of global battery and storage that was installed in 2025. This is starting to become really, really economic. It's now cost competitive with any other form of generation. In fact, it's, solar plus BESS is the cheapest delivered cost of energy that you can find in most regions. And leave you with the comment that the bottleneck is not innovation, it's deployment, which goes back to that execution component. Execution is critical. We need to get on with doing the work so that we can deliver what the system needs. Uh, I think it's important to think about this from a practical perspective as well. Capturing the low-hanging fruit, I believe, is what this should all be about. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. Get a conversation about 100% renewable, or completing some type of a journey. I think the reality is that we're always on the journey. We're always striving to improve. We're always needing to do a bit more. And I'd say it's really the pursuit of that is what we need to be focused on, not necessarily that end state. So, in that vein, let's talk about how we get from 50 to 60, how we get from 60 to 80. We can get to 80% of delivery from these sources using proven technology at incredibly economic rates. The sweet spot is that 60 to 80%, and past that, we do probably need to start to talk about some technological breakthroughs, or some additional savings on the CapEx side in order to make things work. But because of the fact that dispatchable solar is competitive with new build CCGT today, and is getting more competitive, by the month, uh, system cost trajectory there, points us to the ability to get to that 60-80% of delivered energy fairly easily. And so what we need to do is we need to build more of that out now. The economics work at today's cost, and we need to prioritize work in that 2 to 4 hour storage window, which creates the highest value first use cases. back to my comment about getting the low-hanging fruit. Let's not worry about 100 today. Let's worry about improving. Let's worry about getting the next percent and the next percent year over year. That will put us in a place where we allow economics to guide the outcomes and will deliver the best outcomes for society. The other thing that's relevant is, investor appetite is there. The investor appetite is incredibly strong. And again, back to the theme of this presentation, execution is the differentiator. I've already showed you some of these stats, the 2.3 trillion in global energy transition investment in 2025, the 60% growth in battery storage M&A transactions. And that translated to nearly 70 billion in global best investments in 2025, and that's up from 1 billion in 2015. That's a staggering growth profile, and I think probably indicates that there are not enough folks on the execution side to deliver the needs in front of us. So that's something that we need to be aware of and need to make sure that we're building into our capacity as a society. We pulled a quote from Climate, their 2025 Market Intelligence Report, said aggregate available capital is not the bottleneck. Access to well-priced capital is. And in 2026, the winners will be those who combine strong assets with superior execution. That's certainly the track that we've been preparing for at Pulse, and we think that broadly speaking, across the energy system, that statement is true. Execution is going to reign supreme over the next little while. Being able to convert pipelines into operating assets requires performance credibility and execution capability. And investors need the confidence in that asset performance, in your ability to capture revenues from the system, as well as your ability to manage degradation and an asset life cycle. And really that capability comes, or that execution capability is proven through track record. Can you deliver projects on time? Can you deliver projects on budget? And can you deliver planning, and successfully navigate commissioning? That's something where, when investors look at where to put their investments, they're, I believe, going to increasingly turn to the reliability of the folks that they've seen do that successfully over and over. I think the last point that I wanted to make here around execution being the differentiator is that 2025 valuations started to reward steel in the ground over speculative pipeline. I think that's a massive shift in how thinking about the sector, because for the last 10 or 15 years, it was all about pipeline size. It was about making sure that you had enough to execute on later. But that didn't, I don't think, put enough of the focus on the execution side. Investors want built assets that are delivering cash flow, not necessarily pipelines or presentations around how those could be delivered. It's about showing and proving that you have that performance credibility and that execution capacity inside of your fence. So, uh, common theme, execution is paramount. We have to turn project ambition into operating assets. I started with this, and I think it's worth emphasizing again. In many respects, the team is the asset. It's not just about finding skill sets. It's about combining those skill sets into a team that can deliver. And so that integrated team needs to consider engineering and design, construction and EPC capability, commercial and legal, and finance and investor relations. And really, when you weave all of that together, that allows you to be able to take a project, to de-risk it, to construct it, and to operate it. That's the bridge between pipeline and cash flow, is being able to de-risk, construct, and operate. And that requires that integrated delivery team capability that will allow you to do that. I think it's incredibly relevant that 1 in 5 best projects is hit by relatively large operational issues which impact returns. Only slightly more than 80% of projects met their originally designed nameplate capacity at acceptance testing, and that's I think that's a really big deal, because obviously the investor cases are based on the performance that is advertised on that, and that's really going to hit returns, which means that it might compromise ability to attract additional capital. The other part that is increasingly important is that commissioning delays of somewhere between 1 and 8+ months are very common. This is driven in large part by grid, but also sometimes by inexperienced staff and multi-vendor integration failures. That's why having that integrated delivery team is required. Individual experience is, I would say, necessary but insufficient. Really, how you convert on that is by having a team that can weave all of those components together and work as one unit. And that takes repetition. It takes time. You can't just decide to build that team and go to a recruitment agency, put all the bodies into a room, and then immediately start doing that. You need time to work together and to build out like any team. It's like a football team. It works best after the people have been playing together and working together for 1, 2, 3+ years, and in sometimes maybe more. Each project builds muscle memory. It teaches you how to execute against vendor management and grid compliance, and having a combination of those things enables delivery and execution. And what that means is that it requires patience and long-term commitment. High-performing delivery teams cannot be built overnight. It's something that needs sustained people, processes, and culture, and it can't be done on a project-by-project basis by bringing folks in to simply check boxes. What all of this means is it results in the ability to earn investor confidence. And this is where track record meets commercial structure. The investor confidence is ultimately built over time, and it's built by being able to demonstrate a delivery by showing that you can extract revenue from a combination of markets, which includes arbitrage, capacity, ancillary services, and balancing mechanism. And obviously, I think this almost goes without saying, but projects must do that now. You have to have an integrated commercial model that looks across multiple revenue streams. And then the last piece, which is also critically important, is hedging and contractedness. To attract low-cost capital at scale, have the commercial capacity to de-risk your assets. De-risking is really important, and we and many others in the market have worked to create those structures, with lenders increasingly now requiring them to invest at scale. And again, I'll emphasize my point around building on the reps to get there is important. Your first 1 to 2 projects aren't going to be as smooth as your next 3 to 5, which aren't going to be as smooth as your next 6 to 8. As you get into that 10+ range, you have practice, and the ability to deliver incredibly high quality projects on time and on budget, which again requires patience, commitment, time, and investment to get that running. The consistent long-term focus that will allow you to bring that capital in and will allow your team to be successful is absolutely that consistent long-term focus. So, I think we've got a number of items that we need to be thinking through. Grid reform, delivery, and collaboration are forefront in order to underpin the success of that execution model that I've talked about previously. With those ingredients in place, we can and will deliver on the potential of a future energy system, which is less costly and more secure. CP30 and grid reform, I actually see as an opportunity. That has released 500 gigawatts of congested network capacity, and given ready projects a faster path to connection. I know that it was a controversial process, um, and certainly has been a challenging one, for us included. But I think ultimately I view it as an opportunity because it delivers on the ability to turn pipeline into operating assets faster. And I think that's something ultimately as an industry that we need to embrace. We need to embrace that type of grid and regulatory reform that will allow us to spur 40 billion in average annual investment, to deliver against this modern energy system. And piece that I think goes hand in hand with that is that we need to work collaboratively with the TSO, with DNOs and the NESO, to ensure that we minimize connection delays. grid connection remains one of the critical bottlenecks to getting facilities installed, but it's manageable. Early engagement with the NISO and DNOs and strategic site selection allows you to deliver collaborative solutions and deliver those assets. The reform offers that started to come out in Q4 2025 out of that CP30 process have yielded, I think, an accelerated capacity to deliver into the system. And again, I think we should ultimately embrace that and view that as a positive thing. I also will say that I think it's important that we not wait. We need to build the solutions where they're needed, and we can't wait for every framework to be finalized. By that, what I mean is we need to learn how to build around ask for either regulatory or market structures that deliver the solutions to us. We need to create those. We need to make projects bankable today by being more creative on the technical front with our engineering and design, on the construction front with our delivery and execution, and on the commercial front with the structures that we put in place and the commercial frameworks that will ultimately enable the investment and the execution. So I think that's on us as an industry work hard to do that. And I'll close this component by saying, energy demand isn't going to wait for perfection, and neither should we. We should be moving through these and embracing some of the challenges and looking for the solutions, not waiting for them to be delivered to us. And with that, I'll perhaps ask Jordan to come back in and see if there were any questions that potentially came through.
Amazing, thank you. We actually did just have a deluge of questions in that last 10 minutes or so of that presentation. So, firstly, thank you, Trevor. But I will go straight on to the questions just because I don't want to run out of time and
Sure.
there's a lot that needs to be asked. Ben Lane says, thanks, Trevor. Do you have any battery energy storage system projects in service or in the pipeline which are supporting EV charging hubs? I ask as the lack of grid supply is really holding back heavy duty EV adoption, particularly in Wales.
Yes. So in a word, that's a fairly simple answer. We don't. So we don't have anything that's currently underway that directly supports EV hubs. I think that it's a great question because increasingly, I think there's going to be the need to ask where and how are these systems going to be installed and what needs are they going to service? We've seen a lot of what I'll call front of the meter energy storage systems built that are simply looking at playing that market arbitrage game. I think that as we move forward, there's certainly an opportunity to address some of those industrial components that can allow for further integration of other technologies that will ultimately help our energy system progress, but will also allow for better solutions to be scaled in other sectors such as mobility. So I think that's a space to watch, and it's certainly something that we will consider as we think about the future.
Amazing. Richard Cook asks, hi Trevor, your $117 per kilowatt hour figure, is that for 2 hour duration or 4 hour duration solutions?
That I believe was for 4 hour duration solutions.
Amazing. There's that answered. Aaron Gibney asks, what is the typical direction Clean Pulse Energy take when deciding whether to go to the distribution network operator or an IDNO or ICP route with potential asset value?
That's a really great question. I think the part that usually governs that is, well, two things, cost and speed. If we're able to identify, and this is where I go back to my comment around working with the DNOs proactively to understand their constraints and their timing, if you have a conversation with them and determine that it's going to be a lot faster to work with an IDNO, that may be the no-brainer route, even if potentially there's an incremental cost to doing so. On the flip side of it, sometimes it's actually just flat out cheaper to head that route. And then you get a double win where it's both faster and cheaper. And so I would say that's one where having that in-house engineering and technical design capability is important because it allows you to analyze that as a part of the total project investment recommendation, and you select based on what makes the most sense for that particular project. So we have a mix.
Mm,
We have done some projects with IDNO. We have done some projects direct with DNO, where contestable and non-contestable works have been performed by the DNO. So I would say that one is project specific. But
mm.
certainly as the DNOs become busier and they have a lot on their plate as well. I think that there's probably going to be an increasing trend towards working with IDNOs to get things done, quickly and on budget.
Amazing. I have a million of my own questions, but we have run out of time, unfortunately. Aaron Gibney also said, really informative talk. Thanks, Trevor. And Stuart Bauer said, excellent presentation, great pace and content. Thank you. So, yeah, Trevor, I really appreciate you joining us today. And I thank you for that presentation. That was excellent. There was still questions I had, but I'm sure I can just follow up with you anyway.
Absolutely right. And thank you, Jordan. Appreciate you guys having me today, and thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Trevor. Have a great day.